right, happy Monday. Some folks still coming in here, but thank you for coming out. My name is Dave Bradbury. I work at VSET with Nicole, Jeff, Emma at the front, and Javin here with the camera going around. Thank you for coming out for our 35th event. We have speakers number 90, 91, and 92 over the last 10 seasons sharing their journeys, their insights, what they've learned, what they're still learning, all to help Vermonters start, scale their careers, their companies, to improve their communities and our little brave state. One of the things that we reflect upon is how neat it is to bring people together that wouldn't otherwise gather. Tonight we're really excited to have, I don't know what the final count was, but close to 18 Middlebury College students taking Middlebury Entrepreneurship course with our partner at the Innovation Hub. So if you see a young person you don't recognize, say hi, please, and ask them about their business. That's really exciting. Also, we get to see investors that have made angel investments or institutional capital investments in companies all around our state that show up in the room. We even see leaders show up, people that care at the town boards, school boards, and even in Montpelier. So we got former Lieutenant Governor and hopefully the next Lieutenant Governor, Molly Gray, here tonight. Welcome, Molly. So VSET, we're a nonprofit, and this is our 20th year of serving Vermonters. Our core business is one-on-one, no-cost business advising. We met with 313 individual companies and founders last year with our team of 4. Really, the goal here is to help people demystify the journey, to find some resources, and to maybe take that first tough step of asking for help or reaching out, providing help too. We believe in mentorship. It's made a difference in my life, and I know many of you as well. I think the other thing about year 20 is we've had over 217 coworkers this year in our downtown Burlington location. That's the one with the big mural on Main Street, in case you haven't seen what volunteers did to take back our city in some small way and give it a bright go-ahead. Meg is all part of that. Thank you, Meg McGovern. And then finally, I want to kick it off to Nicole after we recognize Hotel Vermont and the Media Factory, which have been our partner as we figured this thing out over the years. And we're so deeply appreciative of that. So unless there's any reason to stop, Nicole, why don't we kick this off? And thank you all for coming out tonight.
Yes. Thanks, Dave. Before I go into it, I just want to say, now that it's 2026, I can say the 10th year of Female Founders. I've been saying going into the 10th season, but we started in 2016. And so the fact that it's actually been 10 years is incredible, and huge round of applause to VSET, and shout out to Sam, who started the series. So just round of applause for that. I'm really excited. Thank you all so much for coming tonight. I cannot wait just to dive in, and I'm going to dive in now. Rather than me introducing our panelists, I would love for each of you to briefly introduce yourself and just start by saying why you got into this field of healthcare. What's your origin story? So, Kathleen, you want to go first?
Sure. I'm Kathleen Dola. I've been a physical therapist for 26 years. 14 of those have been spent running my own private practice in Stowe, Points North Sports and Regenerative PT. I'm very impressed by my fellow speakers. They are brilliant. They are pragmatic. They are innovative. And I feel like most of my boss career moves have come from a place of desperation. I was working as a staff PT and outpatient with 3 little kids, and I found it virtually impossible to go to work and have a family. It felt like every single time, I know this resounds with other moms in the audience, it felt like every time that I was scheduled to go into work, either I'd have a sick kid or the daycare would be closed or there'd be a snow day. And it got to a point where I felt that either I would have to find another career or I'd have to start my own practice. And there were other practices in Stowe. I felt intimidated, and I just decided this has to work. This absolutely will work. And I opened my practice out of a space in my home. It wasn't even ready when a good friend of mine called 2 weeks before I was scheduled to open and asked me to treat her back. And so we treated out of my living room for the first 2 weeks, and then we finally moved into the space that we were renovating, and it's taken off ever since then.
Wow, that's awesome.
Thank you.
So I really love, first of all, I'm so excited to be here. This is a wonderful panel. And I love what you're talking about, starting from a place of desperation, because that's often when good things happen, when you're just kind of stuck. And that's kind of what happened for me. I was trained as a doctor, internal medicine, and I was not happy with the options that I had in my practice and what I could offer patients. It seemed like it was really, first of all, having just the same sort of pressures of having to see people a shorter amount of time, and pulling, the only thing I had time to do is pull out the prescription pad and prescribe something, and I just wasn't happy with that. And so, long story short, I ended up bailing out and then starting to do research on something in medicine that really was very little understood, which is connective tissue, complementary therapies, manual movement-based therapies, acupuncture, and kind of took off from there. So it's really, a lot of times I think when we have ideas, it really comes out of being frustrated. And so that's kind of how I got there.
I will chime in on this theme. Okay, so my name is Katie McCurdy. I have a background as a designer, so user experience designer, and I've worked in healthcare for the past 15 years or so. But I'm also the founder of a startup called Pictal Health, and Jeff is passing out some flyers, which are just visual aids to show you what the concept is. So please take a look and pass it along. The idea is to give patients a way to make a visual of their health history, a visual timeline, so that they can show what's happened in their life and they don't have to repeat their story over and over again. So this was really born out of my own experience of frustration and desperation, having already one autoimmune condition of myasthenia gravis and living in New York City, having all these new symptoms crop up, and I was finding myself really jumping around to different doctors, struggling to get my story out in this short amount of time. And also, I was working as a designer and had an interest in data visualization. So it was sort of that combination of things caused me to start kind of experimenting and dabbling. And I finally started Pictal Health in 2018.
Wow. So we have 3 amazing women up here. And I think this panel is going to be really interesting. We have Katie, who you're in the digital health and also a founder in the med tech, ecosystem. Helene, you were a founder. You founded something. You're also a doctor. We're at the NIH for a long time, and then now starting at UVM at the Osher Center. And so you have this institutional perspective from the healthcare industry as well that I think, Katie, you can probably speak to this, but when you're starting a healthcare company, you kind of need to know the other side, the side that you're working with, not just being, the startup founder kind of in your own, building what you want to build. You have a customer and somebody you need to work with. And then Kathleen, you're the service, you're working with people and helping them with their physical bodies in person. So whether you're taking notes tonight or not, I think we just have 3 really good perspectives that are important when talking about women's health. And so to start, I want to ask each of you from where you sit, what do women most misunderstand about what it actually takes to be healthy? I know that's kind of a tough question to start, but we have anyone can start.
I did have a point of view on this. So I was going to invert the question about what, from my point of view and the people who have come to work with Pictal Health, what clinical teams most misunderstand about them, because a lot of the folks who are desperate to be heard and to tell their story are dealing with, and these are where my notes come in. I made a list of conditions where women are disproportionately affected. So chronic fatigue, autoimmune conditions, fibromyalgia, long COVID, IBS are all at least 66% women, and most of them are more than that. And so these are all conditions that are difficult to diagnose, and often, women are not believed. They're told that, it's in their head. So this is a pattern I've seen over and over again. And so I feel like in order for women to be healthy, they need to be heard and believed. And so to me, it's like women are trying to be healthy and they're seeking care. And that's where the traditional healthcare system is often failing them. And so a more holistic approach, like Helene is, I'm sure, a fan of.
I totally agree with you. I think that a big part of the problem is that the medical we call it the biomedical research kind of enterprise is really so far behind in understanding, first of all, fundamentally what is health. We study diseases, but we don't study how to support health. A lot of these conditions that are either stress-related, autoimmune-related, they have a course. They typically have what we call a relapsing remitting course, where people have exacerbations and remissions. People spend a lot more time figuring out about the exacerbation than understanding the remissions. Right. And understanding when somebody is actually able to come out of a flare-up. What did they do? What did they do in order to get well again? We do almost no research on that. That's what we really need to understand. And so it's flipping the question again. It's really understanding health in addition to understanding disease. And so women need to speak up. And I think that this method that you've developed to make the story visible is so important, because it can also highlight the positive as well as the negative. So
that's true.
I think that's very exciting.
Yeah.
Can I make a comment?
Please.
So I do think part of this is just how fragmented our medical system is. We have a great medical system as far as medical training goes, and we have specialties, which are great if you are identified as having a rare problem within one of the specialties, like a rare orthopedic problem or a rare heart issue. The problem is putting all the pieces together when a patient or client has a number of different symptoms coming from a number of different conditions or injuries. Those are the people who I think get lost in the shuffle, and that's frequently women. Women carry a very heavy load most of the time between caregiving and work, and as you mentioned, they are not given the same amount of credibility as men, as patients. So.
I was going to follow up by asking you what physical patterns you're seeing most often in women, and how do you treat that, and also how are you making the women feel heard with these patterns that you're seeing?
So the patterns that I'm seeing frequently demonstrate a stress pattern. So sympathetic firing will show up in mechanical issues in the base of your neck and thoracic spine. We also can see weakness in the hips and the pelvis, just because when the thoracic spine is off, it can throw off the pelvis. So this is when it's important to be able to gather all the information that a patient has to offer about their past medical history, and also look at injury in the context of the full body, and not just look at a knee or look at a shoulder.
And how are you doing that in your practice now? Are you being really intentional with the conversations you're having?
Yes. We take a full medical history when I have a new client come in, and I make sure that we cover everything. And it does happen. People tend to exclude the parts of their medical history that they think are not relevant, or they might just forget. Like, I had someone that I was treating for neck pain for 6 weeks, and it wasn't really getting any better. And then one day she said, "Hey, did I ever tell you I was in a coma for 3 months a while ago?" And it's like, okay, that's relevant. Thank you for that information. And then we were able to find some shifts in her cranial cervical fascia that we were able to address, and that helped to clear the neck pain. So.
Wow. Now, Ellen, I want to ask you, just with your experience being on the founder side and, working at the institutional level, what can leaders do? I would say probably on the big healthcare side, to really support founders and just women's health in general.
Well, I would say, first of all, is to ask the right questions. I'm speaking from the point of view of research, because it's so important, right? Without the right research, if we don't ask the right research questions, we're not going to have the data that can then support, for example, insurance reimbursement for different types of therapies, but also partnership with industry in order to develop the technologies that are necessary to do the research, for example. That's just a couple of examples. And I'm very happy to say that at NIH right now, we essentially diagnosed the same problem about the fragmentation, not just of healthcare, but also of healthcare research. It was all in silos. And there was research on the heart, and then the research on the brain, and then research on the muscles, but very little integration of all of this. And so now we started this big program called Whole Person Health, which now pretty much NIH is lined up behind, and is going to really change how a lot of research is done, with more of an emphasis on integration, which will be very, very important. So asking the right question sometimes can be difficult when it involves what we call a paradigm shift. I don't use the word paradigm lightly here. It's sometimes a word that gets used sort of lightly, but no, this is a real paradigm shift. It's going from a century of specific research on diseases of specific organs and systems to really trying and to understand the whole body, all the systems together, but also psychological, emotional, physical, social, environmental, all of that together. So we're doing it.
Wow.
It's happening. Yeah.
It's happening.
Yeah.
I love to hear that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, Katie, from Pictal, you are building this awesome tool, but you also have to deal with research. And how are you working with the healthcare system in terms of, research and maybe policy? How are you working with that? What's some advice for other founders in the room?
I'm not.
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay, so I've had some really good conversations with researchers over the years and discussions about using Pictal as a research tool. And I think they're gathering someone's health history, measuring how well does that support a doctor-patient interaction? Like, what are these kind of potential measurable outcomes? To what extent did the patient feel heard? How efficient was it to look at a patient's story visually versus hearing it only, through conversation? I think there's a lot of research opportunity. I just haven't been able to close any of those partnerships. And there's a lot of stringent requirements for research. So any research tool that is used for research purposes needs to be HIPAA compliant. And there's other kind of data requirements involved in research. So I think it's like a partnership with an academic center is really helpful often for startups to establish outcomes, early outcomes. And especially if the startup is starting to understand their market, to be able to try and use leverage partnerships like that to get outcomes that will then help support their go-to-market effort. So.
And what has been the hardest trade-off with being a founder in the healthcare system?
Yeah, I told Nicole, I'm a non-standard founder in that, the business hasn't really taken off, but Yeah, so I think trade-offs, I've done things maybe a different way. So I have not gotten funding, and that's been really hard. So I've, traded off income or, a certain level of comfort. I've had to rely on my husband a lot. I think building in healthcare is really hard. Building digital health solutions it's just really difficult. There's a lot of dynamics around like who is your buyer versus who is your user. So if you're selling to any sort of health system, your buyer is not your user, and even if your end users are so excited about what you're working on, it can just be a hard way in. There's a lot of competition. There's a lot of regulatory requirements around HIPAA. And so, there's a lot of, it's been a hard road. I will say the new kind of AI tools to help us build things has been really awesome and energizing. I was able to build a prototype of like a mini product in like 15 hours. It feels really great. It feels very polished. And to be able to just do that and maybe even like put that out into the world as a proof of concept, I think as founders, we have tools available to us to get feedback from potential users, to talk to potential customers, so I think there's a lot going on right now.
Yeah.
I veered away from your question.
That's great. That's what this is all about.
Yeah.
I'm trying to ask the least amount of questions. You guys just talk. What about for you two, in terms of like technology advancements, how are both of you seeing, technology, maybe even AI, helping women's health right now?
As a sole practitioner, I don't use a lot of AI. There are more tools available that are higher tech, and I invested 2 years ago in a high-powered musculoskeletal laser, which has really been helpful.
No idea what that means.
Okay, so
yeah, thank you. I was like, I do not know what that means.
So it's a infrared. It's a near-infrared light laser. It can heat up to 40 watts, which can, if you're not familiar with light wavelength science, it can penetrate deeply into the tissue, and through a really boring biochemical cascade, which I could share. I don't want to take up time with it. No.
I won't understand it.
Rapidly increases the health of the tissue. It helps to speed up the inflammatory process. It helps with new tissue deposition. And that's been really transforming for a lot of my athlete and other patients. I had a female ski racer in the practice 2 summers ago who had ruptured her patellar tendon. The normal rehab progression would be 10 to 12 weeks of rehab with gradual progression to return to snow after that. We had her back on snow with no problem within 7 weeks using the laser 3 times a week.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Just a follow-up question. Do you have to get trained on how to use this?
Yes, I had to get certified in how to use it.
Okay, I was like,
Definitely.
No one can just buy this. I'm sorry, guys.
No.
Okay. So you had to get certified on how to use it.
Yes, I did. 2 certifications.
Okay, 2 certifications. Can't buy this online.
Right.
Technology, absolutely, and this is so important, especially in underdeveloped areas that need catching up. So, an example, some of you may have heard the term myofascial pain. Pretty much, I would say, probably 80% plus of people get it at some point. When you get these sort of painful sort of knots or areas that are tender, that hurt, and you come and go, that kind of thing. Well, up until pretty recently, there was 0 research on myofascial pain. Why? Because we didn't have the tools to actually measure objectively what a practitioner, somebody who is able to use their hands, for example, to palpate the tissues and to feel that there's something stuck or not gliding properly, or that there's a muscle that's contracted, those kinds of things. We had 0 way to objectively measure that. And when you don't have that, then if you say, for example, you want to test a new kind of therapy, like a laser, for example, and you want to do a research project on it, well, you can ask people, well, do you feel better? Great. But it's even better if you can objectively document, oh yeah, there was this abnormality in the tissue, which as a result of the treatment got improved, and you can measure that, and that's how you can then convince CMS and Blue Cross to actually pay for the techniques, because a lot of these techniques are not reimbursed. And so what we did at NIH over the past 7 years that I was there is we decided to fund, we now funded 11 projects to develop new technologies to actually do measurements of myofascial tissues and to see whether they improve as a result of different types of treatments. But this is completely new. So this is going to really change things. And so that I think there's no question that if you can't measure it, it's very, very difficult to implement, treatments. So, yeah, absolutely, extremely important.
Why do you think it's just now changing? Like, is it the people here? Like,
Because I fought like hell.
yeah, okay. Yes. That's what I was wondering.
You
I was
have
like,
no idea.
yeah, we
how
want to know.
This, I mean, this is the truth, honest truth. I mean, this was a fight. In 2019, the NIH was awarded $500 million a year, okay, to study pain and opioid to address the opioid crisis. Out of all this money, there was zero for myofascial pain. And I was lucky enough to be on the executive committee for this large program. And it took 2 years of intense pressure and arguing and not giving up. And finally, we ended up getting it funded. It was extremely difficult. Why? Because people thought it was just, nobody does this. Nobody does this, therefore we shouldn't do it, right? So, I'm sorry, did I see a hand up?
Yeah, no, I'm just curious because we, as a society, as a world, we haven't really understood fascia until very, very recently.
Yeah.
I want to say maybe 12 years that we've actually known what fascia, we think we know what fascia is. So does that have something to do with the fact that the National Health Institute, whatever, was so against
Well,
myofascial pain?
I think you've got part of the answer is that the conventional medicine world didn't really, like, for example, in medical school, right, you learn anatomy by dissecting a cadaver, and what you do is you get rid of all the stuff, the connective tissue of the fascia, in order to get to the muscles and the bones, and you just throw it out. Same thing in surgery, for example. Surgeons will cut through it and not even think twice about cutting through fascia. That's beginning to change. And the people who started paying attention to fascia were the non-physicians. A lot of these people who feel this. But it was outside of the conventional world of medicine, and therefore it's very difficult for medicine to accept that there was something important about the body that was actually not in the textbooks. Right. And that took some doing. But there was a fascial research society that started in 2007, I believe. Yeah, and a lot of effort. And finally, I mean, they were, I guess, unlucky or lucky enough to have me at the at the NIH to really impress, insist that this is a part of the research that I used to say it's not just a blind spot, it's a crater, because there's so much of the importance of fascia in the body goes way beyond the musculoskeletal system, because there's fascia inside every single organ of the body.
The cerebrospinal fluid is liquid fascia, as we understand.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Right.
That's right. So yeah, so it's going to change, but it's just, again, it was because it was something that was brought from the outside. From the outside of medicine, and that's difficult to do sometimes. Always, I guess.
Thank you.
Yeah, welcome. Thanks for the question.
Kathleen, I wanted to ask you about, preventative practices that women can do? If you see, are there any movements that women can do to prevent a lot of the issues that you're treating?
Oh, so much. Yes, there's so
Do
many.
tell.
Yes. I run a program out of my practice called Warrior Women Weightlifting, and I teach women in classes and in private and semi-private training sessions how to lift heavy weights. So we've got barbells, kettlebells, dumbbells, bands, everything that you'd see in a gym. It's a small space, but we make it work. Just as important as the strength is the flexibility. And there's a lot of information on social media these days. You can go on Instagram and pull up 50 videos of different exercises if you want. The main issue is just weeding out what's good for you. I'm 55 years old. I see 20-year-olds doing complicated moves, and the first thing I want to do is give that a try. And I've found out the hard way that sometimes it just might not agree with my joints. All right. There's a lot of Tai Chi that's become trendy on Instagram too, and you can actually find some good mobility workouts. And I think just starting your day with an easy mobility workout is a good practice to get into and good for injury prevention.
Are there any injuries that you're seeing really common right now?
It's always kind of a mishmash, but I'm seeing now, I wouldn't say necessarily that this is a change from the past, just only that we're identifying it now. And I think a lot of what we're seeing is related to stress. What we know, and pardon me for geeking out for a minute here, there's the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which modulates the stress response and also modulates the release of cortisol. What we know about this is that with long-term low-grade stress, the HPA axis upregulates that release of cortisol, and people end up with things like autoimmune illnesses, skin conditions, joint inflammatory problems. With chronic high stress, the opposite happens, and the cortisol is downregulated. So what we see there is a suppression of the immune system, people coming down with illnesses and infections, and also having cognitive issues. So when people come in with just a host of chronic injuries, aches and pains, there usually is a stress factor involved. And the main challenge is identifying that, getting the patient to talk about it, and arming them with resources to take a whole body treatment approach.
Could I jump in there?
Please.
Yeah, with Pictal, so I think over the years I've worked with probably about 100 people one-on-one. When I first started out, I didn't have any technology yet, and I would interview them, get their story, map it out visually, and hand them a PDF to take to their doctor. So in that process, I saw a lot of people's stories, and I saw a lot of patterns. And just to kind of play off the stress theme, I made a list of the type of kind of precursors that I saw in people's stories that seemed to appear over and over kind of before they really got sick. And of course, stress, a stressful period of time, they would say things like bad boss or, whatever. It could be anything that type of stress. Of course, trauma and early life trauma or really at any time. Pregnancy was a really interesting one, and the hormone changes. So often people might have a new health condition after pregnancy that they didn't have before. Period, menopause, really like any hormonal changes, I noticed sometimes seem to change things for people. This wasn't like a research study, it was just me seeing all these different examples, but infections or viruses, so often like I would see them as these like red dots, recurring infections, pneumonia, mono, like over and over and over, and then things like kind of flare up after that. Chemical exposures, mold exposure, concussions or traumatic brain injury. So anyway, it was fascinating for me to really see, and by seeing it, really internalize how stress and all these different factors kind of play a role in people's stories. And by them seeing it, it also helped them make more sense of their story and understand a little bit more about like why we are where we are now. So.
Yeah. Oh, just to follow up on that, what have you learned beyond that, just with women's health in general, seeing all of these stories come together, noticing patterns? How are you now, facing that?
Like for myself?
For yourself, or being a founder, or just like your general conception of the industry and what people are going through?
I mean, it's an interesting question. I want people to have that self-knowledge, like seeing other people go through this process and really understand their story and own it in a different way. I want all women to really go through that process and have that knowledge to then be a platform to maybe go seek certain types of help. Yeah, I don't know.
No, that's good.
What else to say? Yeah.
Another question I have for you. I know before this we briefly talked about gaslighting, and I know that's a topic that's a little scary to talk about, but I think is necessary. And so, could you just talk a little bit about that and what you've seen with that?
Yeah.
And explain what gaslighting means.
Medical gaslighting is like women, especially, being told that they must have depression or anxiety, or that their symptoms aren't real. And so a lot of those conditions I mentioned, the symptoms are invisible, so you can't go in and show a rash or so. Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of stats and stories about this. Women with severe stomach pain waited nearly 33% longer for emergency care than men. Women are likely to be incorrectly diagnosed when they have a heart attack as a mental illness.
Wow.
So there's all kinds of like stats around this, and I've had an up close. So I have myasthenia gravis, which is a neuromuscular condition that causes weakness, and for some amount, 10% I think of myasthenia gravis patients don't have any blood markers. So meanwhile, they're weak. They sometimes can't breathe. They can't chew or swallow when they're in crisis. I have a friend who has no markers, and she has been repeatedly sent away from the emergency room saying that she has a functional neurological disorder when she has myasthenia gravis. So it's like it can be these life-threatening situations where women are not heard and believed. It's maddening.
Mm-hmm.
And when you kind of get in that cycle with a certain doctor or a certain health system, when that's in your notes, it's really hard to break out of that. So I've seen people just have to go to a different health system.
Mm.
It's really hard. But when you find a doctor who really listens, like my neurologist who I just saw today, it is so special.
Mm.
So, yeah, that's what I want for all women.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Being a doctor and having that experience, hearing something like that, what is your natural response?
You have to really work on it at a systems level.
Mm-hmm.
This is not, I mean, obviously one physician at a time will eventually, you happen to find a doctor that was compassionate listening. There are many,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But how do you change that to become the norm, say, how medicine is taught, like in medical school, for example? And a very important landmark realization, especially for the field of women's health, was that a lot of the studies that were done were not sufficiently what we call powered, right, to be able to detect sex differences in the results. And this is how we got to know, and I think you mentioned heart disease, a great example of that. We used to know so much about heart disease, but almost all of it was about male heart disease. Because the reason is because in order to understand what happens for example, you want to study the effect of a treatment, say a coronary bypass or something like that. In order to have enough patients to do a sub-analysis separate for male and female, you need twice the number of patients in the study, twice as expensive. And so until there was that realization that it was important, that just wasn't happening because the funding wasn't there. But now I'm really glad to say that has changed, and there has been a tremendous emphasis now on looking at what we call sex as a biological variable, which means that this is required. That you have to justify, if you want to have funding, say from the government, you need to show that you're considering this in your study. Another question?
Yeah, sorry.
Sure.
Again for the question. When we're thinking of like funding for medical studies that affect women, is there such thing that's happening for like fat people and trans people, like queer and trans people who often need the same level of care and listening and understanding and being seen, especially fat people who are always told that, and this is for both men and women and queer and trans fat people who are looking for care, and they are told that, your hormones, if you're trans, whatever, or you're fat, you just need to lose weight. How is that? Is there any of that going in there?
This is very complex. Obviously, what you mentioned different topics. Nobody is going to question that obesity is a huge problem, especially in the United States, but now increasingly worldwide. And so this is a subject that's being taken very seriously. No question about that. That whether there are psychological biases against people who are overweight, yeah, I'm sure that is, and there's a lot of studies about that. With respect to gender and trans, especially for transgender right now, as I'm sure you're aware, it's an area that has suffered tremendously just because of political reasons. And so it's going to take a while for that to play itself out. So right now it's hard to know how much that's going to hold back some of the research funding, for example, in understanding, psychological and physical problems that are specific to people who are transgender. So yeah, that's an area of great concern.
I want to switch modes a little bit and talk about what success looks like. So for each of you, what does success look like in the industry? Is it a behavioral change? Is it physically, obviously, seeing someone get better? Systemically? Yeah. What does it look like? Kathleen, why don't you start?
I think behavior change, symptom improvement as reported by the patient, and just feedback that I get from them, either immediately right after their treatment concludes, or down the road 6 months later if I hear from them and get a good report that they're managing their symptoms, that their pain is diminished, that they're even more importantly doing the things that they want to do, that their function has improved. Again, I have a very small clinic, so I'm not collecting these results to scale, but it does help me. Just hearing these outcomes helps me with my treatment plans and my protocols.
Now, this is just a quick follow-up question,
Sure.
but depending on, obviously it changes depending on what somebody is trying to recover from, but is there like an average time that, your patients, specifically women, are in PT?
Totally varies.
Okay.
It just completely depends on a number of factors. And you can't even really consider the severity of an injury to be one of those factors. Some people will just bounce back within 3 treatments. Other people will come in for months. I think a lot of it has to do with how comfortable the patient is managing their condition on their own. Some people enjoy that. Some people just want to come in and get a plan and then check back in a few months. Sorry, what was the question again?
What success looks like? Which you kind of, yeah, no, you answered that. It was basically the average time.
Yeah, I
people-
can't, if I had to give you an average time, I would say 5 visits.
Not bad.
Yeah, I have the luxury of, since I work out of my home and I have less overhead, I can devote an hour-long treatment to everyone. So I think I have the luxury of getting more done in a session than a lot of PTs do in a big medical system. But if I had to guess, I would say 5 visits would be the average number.
Wow. Success.
Well, success from my vantage point, obviously, is more, as I was saying before, it's more at a systems level. It's seeing that different kinds of research questions are being asked that are more holistic, that are more about understanding health, understanding how to support health, how to support resilience, how to support the restoration of health of the whole person. These are complicated things. It's a lot more complicated to understand how to support whole person health than to understand how one molecule binds to a receptor. You know, it's just harder. But so success will be when enough effort and hard work, right, is put towards these questions. And so first there has to be the will to make the shift, and I think that will, as I was saying earlier, has happened. People are realizing that they're missing something really, really important by doing this sort of fragmented approach to understanding diseases. But then the next part is to do it. And I'm really happy to say that right before I left NIH, we ended up funding an amazing project that's called a whole person human reference physiome, which has had about building a knowledge network map of the entire person, the whole body, that links all the physiological systems together, and it's going to be the foundation for doing complex, analyses of data, and including, for example, the All of Us initiative, which is where it's enrolled. I think they have now 600,000 participants, where their healthcare data is available, as well as genomic and environmental exposures, as well as all kinds of behavioral tests and Fitbit data, et cetera, et cetera. And so all of that, these data will need to be analyzed, grafted onto a coherent framework. And right now we didn't even have that. So now this project is going to be building that. So this is the foundational. And so a lot is going to have to happen, in a different way, more integrative.
Cool. Thank you.
So I think there's a few maybe levels of success. So if I think about like the population of women who are dealing with the types of conditions that I mentioned earlier, it would be finding a way to be heard and seen, and to really have their whole self seen. So like all of those type of precursors, just their whole story and their whole person. On an individual level, what I've seen is success looks like I don't hear from them anymore, and that's great. They find the right treatment, they go on with their life, they're fully present, they're not having to think about their health too much anymore. And then I think for me, a success is just trying to bring this to as many people as I can. Bring this idea of visualizing information about our health so that we can communicate more effectively.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
With that, right now, the way that you're interacting with individuals at the moment, right? This is what you're doing?
Not anymore. So now I have software where they can.
But it's still one individual at a time, and so not with like a healthcare system, for example, that would implement this.
Right, we are dabbling. We're dabbling with like taking in data and creating timelines, and there's been interest in that over the years. So that would be taking data like from a health record or in data aggregation place and creating these visual timelines, and then maybe adding on top of that the other aspects of the patient's story. I've always been such an advocate for the story really has to come from the patient.
Yeah.
So what you have if you have an automatically generated timeline is you have a baseline of some knowledge, but then the patient needs to really add on top
Absolutely.
of that.
I mean, it
Yeah.
would seem to me that this could be like the first item in taking a history for any patient, but it could still be also very valuable for people to use on their own.
Yeah.
Which is what partially what you're doing, right?
Right, at
And
this point, yeah.
At this point, because
Yeah.
self-care is so important.
Yeah.
And so this could, okay.
And doing it
Yeah.
on your own, you learn about yourself, and then
Yeah.
you have a way to communicate that story without having to
Yeah.
speak it.
Thanks.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, thank you.
Mm.
So being in the middle of it right now, of having a startup and, I forget what you just said to explain what you're doing, but basically just kind of running with it. What is advice of what to not do right now?
Right
Yes,
now?
yeah.
Like in this moment in time? Or like or like all the things that I've done wrong? Because there's a lot of those.
I won't let you say that. I would say you right now, present day,
Mhm.
what is advice? Because like Dave said at the beginning, we have around 18 Middlebury entrepreneurs in the room. So just for the people looking to start businesses.
Like, what would I do if I were to do it over?
Sure.
I mean, I was thinking about this a little bit. So I think like finding a co-founder is really, really helpful and important. And I looked for a long time and I never found the right person. And I think that has held me back. So I think I would highly, highly recommend trying to find one or more co-founders, and that is super complicated, and it's a marriage and all of that. At the same time, it's been almost impossible to do it alone.
Mm-hmm.
So I would do that. I think the funding piece has been, and the lack of funding for me has also been really difficult. And there's a lot of people in this room. I see Louisa. There's a lot of people in this room who know a lot about that. And I spent quite a bit of time chatting about options with Visa, which is an amazing resource. So, yeah, I think being brave enough to figure it out, and even if it's not perfect, I would recommend that. So
Yeah. I mean, you started in 2018. You've been doing it for a long time.
Yep.
And it's impressive. It's very impressive.
It's
You're very impressive.
It's almost self-sustaining. And so, but I get these waves of people signing up, and it feels good. It feels good to be able to keep this going. And I have 2 developers I'm working with now, and we're following the news. I don't know if anyone's heard about OpenAI now. You can pull your health information into it. This is the big news this week. So, yeah, we're thinking about what are creative ways we can plug in to the health system and really accelerate this and get it out to more people. So,
yeah. I mean, even hearing about it for myself, I'm like, I would love something like this. And how would I guess this is another question, how would I start to use it? Would it be reaching out to Pictal, or would it be talking to my healthcare provider of is this an option?
you could just go to pictalhealth.com. Right now it's like a self-service tool, and there's a annual fee or annual subscription, and you can just get started. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I now want to open some questions up to the audience. So yeah, I'll just call on people. I think there's a microphone.
Testing. Can you hear me? Okay.
Hi, thank you. I was actually curious. I'm in the older, like you said, 55.
Yes.
And I've just found that going through menopause, there's been no information. So we have children, we kind of know about that, and then all of a sudden menopause and all these things start happening, and no one gives us any information. So is there not any studies in the NIH, or is that something that just hasn't happened? That's what I'm curious about.
This is an area that is starting to get some attention, and what I love is that so many women are talking about it right now. 5 years ago, that wasn't happening. 3 years ago, that wasn't even happening. I feel like at least half of the women coming into my practice have questions about perimenopause and menopause. And it is difficult, but not impossible to get information. Do you have a primary care doctor that you trust? Okay. And an OBGYN could, if one is really struggling with symptoms of perimenopause or menopause, you could try just a low-dose hormone replacement therapy, which is helping a lot of women these days. Another option for women who gain a lot of weight during menopause just due to insulin resistance and just declining metabolism. Some of those women are starting to are beginning a course of a GLP-1, again at a low dose. So there are medication options out there. From a physical training standpoint, the best thing that one can do is to work out hard a few days a week. I see someone doing bicep curls back there. Right, exactly. Heavy weights 3 times a week, and then some sort of high-intensity workout, whether that's if you're able to run, if you can do sprints, like 5 1-minute sprints, 1 minute recover, repeat that 2 more times. You can do sprints on a spin bike. You can use a row machine. If you're a swimmer, you can swim. Something that gets your heart rate up to an uncomfortable level. The science behind that is that it boosts your metabolism and improves our insulin sensitivity. And it also is really good for cognition. A lot of women report like a menopause brain or brain fog. And that helps with the cognition too. Just that strenuous effort with high intensity exercise helps us release a chemical or a protein in our brain and spinal cord called BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and that really just helps with it's like fertilizer for our brain tissue. Yeah, just helps build new neural tissue, helps with neuroplasticity. So I appreciate the cheerleader back there. Yeah, that's what you can do right now that can help with the symptoms.
I can also
Please.
comment. Obviously, physical activity, hugely important. Another thing that's really important is sleep. And that ties into stress management. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of times, right, and of course, and diet. So good nutrition, nothing fancy, doesn't have to be fancy, but making sure that the diet is balanced, good amount of physical activity with the right amount of, strengthening, stretching, et cetera, cardio. But it's very, very difficult to do any of these things if you're exhausted because you haven't had a good night's sleep.
True.
And very often, a lack of attention to stress management is what's missing from a lot of wellness programs or programs for helping people lose weight or to that kind of thing. But the good news is that there are techniques that are well established that work to help with decreasing that whole cortisol cascade. Can be really slowed down and dampened by simple breathing exercises. We know now that just simple deep breathing can activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which counteracts the effects of the sympathetic nervous system. Simple stretching exercises, very Tai Chi, for example, things like Qigong, yoga, can really help people to especially sort of slow down at the end of the day before going to bed, all kinds of things like that. So I would say the 3 pillars, right, is a good nutrition, physical activity, and stress management and sleep. Yeah.
As a sleep medicine physician, I want to echo that. But women are disproportionately impacted by sleep disorders.
Absolutely.
And a lot of our screening tools were based on female features.
Mm-hmm.
So sleep apnea, for example, thinking of snoring, but women don't often present with snoring, present with difficulty sleeping, anxiety, depression, under-depression sleep. And so a lot of times it's often missed, especially during certain hormonal stages, like menopause.
Yep.
Thank you. Louisa?
I have 2 things. One, with regards to research, I've always read that actually all research in medical was always done on men only until the 70s, mid to late 70s. So have you seen more studies that are just female focused? Because all the studies and research was based on men, and it didn't include us.
Yeah, well, it's not like 100%, but yeah, you're right. Until actually more recently than that, there was really not the emphasis on doing to at least giving equal attention to males and females. Certainly for some particular conditions that affect disproportionately women, there needs to be research that is directed at women populations, and that's starting to happen, for sure, much more than it was like even just 10 years ago. So people have become, the problem has been diagnosed in terms of the need for more research on women's health. And the previous administration, the Biden administration, had a huge program on women's health, which I believe has mostly survived. A lot of the studies that were funded in the past 4 or 5 years are underway now. So we should be able to start seeing results. The thing with research you have to remember is it takes a certain amount of time to prepare the study and to have it funded and then to execute the study you're looking at. It's not instant, results. It takes sometimes a decade before it's like turning the Titanic, but it's turning.
Okay, wait, and my second thing was for you. So my daughter had a really bad, my daughter had 2 years ago a really bad ski accident. She was skiing and someone came out of the woods, a dad with his son following him. They probably hit it 80 miles an hour. Her face was basically destroyed. She had surgeries. It's 2 years out. She's still dealing. Why didn't I hook her up with you? Because every time she goes into a different doctor, they're not getting the whole picture. She's got like occipital, she had the orbital, she had the nose, she had jaw, like it's crazy.
Wow.
And not one doctor has actually taken the time to look at the whole thing. So I'm
Yeah.
sending her to you.
Okay. Please do. Yeah. I'm sorry that happened, Louisa.
Thank you so much.
Hey, Gwen.
Hey, guys.
Hey,
Thank you
Gwen.
so
Hey, girl.
much. This is awesome. Hey, everybody.
That's our friend Gwen.
I am really interested in where we are seeing a lot of healthcare innovations are completely outside of the traditional system, right? Like Katie, knowing a little bit about your story, like you have chosen integrity and values alignment over the easy, like fast growth models. And I see that with a number of the, med tech companies that are scooting around here. And I'd be interested to know, knowing if you've ever heard of All Brains Belong. They're a small, innovative practice that has chosen to operate entirely outside of traditional funding and traditional, whatever. I don't know how to talk about this stuff. You know what I'm talking about, though. I'd be interested to know what adaptations need to happen for us to be able to integrate these types of technologies, this approach, this innovative, it shouldn't be innovative, but oh my God, you're a woman? Great, let's talk about it, right? Like approaches to medical, to actual, a culture of whole personhood. What has to happen institutionally?
I mean, I think part of what you're talking about, so All Brains Belong is, it's a clinic and I think a research center too, led by a woman on the spectrum, and it treats people who are on the autism spectrum, plus all of the other conditions that go along with it. It's really cool. And just like many clinics that see the whole person, I think it became probably impossible for them to operate within the insurance structure. And so I forgot your first name. Kathleen, operates out of her house, so she's able to spend more time with people and make that work. But I think the forces of insurance are usually what I hear, and you have, I'm sure, much more perspective than me, but that's what I hear, forcing people outside and becoming a cash pay clinic. And then I think that trickles all the way through the system, and just figuring out well, who's going to pay for that? How do we get that reimbursed? And that's not reimbursable. And that, that eventually trickles down to startups like mine. So you probably have more to say.
Well, I mean, part of the kinds of strategies for increasing, for example, insurance reimbursement involves doing, for example, studies that are in partnership with, say, the CMS, the Center for Medicare Services. They are now funding some studies in order to generate the data such that then they will be covered, you know.
Mm.
So it's really engaging the payers, engaging not just the healthcare providers, but the healthcare administrators. There's a great example of this right here at the University of Vermont, the Comprehensive Pain Program. I don't know if you all have heard about it, but it's a fantastic program that is now being covered by Medicaid, and it's a complicated. It was a very complicated path to get there, but this program is now attracting national attention because it's so successful. So it's really one brick at a time, you know, to sort of get enough evidence, and then, but the snowball can start rolling down the hill faster than you think. You know, once we now have, at least I'm aware of at least 4 other states right now that are trying to copy the model of the Comprehensive Pain Program. And once people realize that something works, it's really, but the thing that was so beautiful about the program here that happened is that the decision was made by the hospital administration to do it, not because they had all the data, but because it was the right thing to do, ultimately. And that is quite, it doesn't happen often, but when it does, it can really start, you know, it can be the first step.
And in that case, like the hospital maybe took on a little bit of risk if they're not being fully reimbursed.
Yep. Then they could lose money. But guess what? Within a couple of years, they saw that these are patients who are on opiates, chronic pain, just some of the biggest healthcare users. Their emergency room visits got cut by half very quickly. So it was very clear from the beginning that they may not be making money, but they're not going to be losing money.
Yeah.
And that helped convince the hospital administration. But nevertheless, when they decided to cover it, they didn't have those data, right? So the data happened as a result of a good decision that was made by a group of people who really worked together. It was quite remarkable, actually. It's a great story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll do one more question. See some, maybe 2.
Hi. This question's primarily for Katie. I was curious if you encourage people to use the printouts that they get in their mental health treatment, because I'm a sex education coach. I would benefit so much getting something like that. And I wondered, too, if you have couples who are able to do like an overlapping one, because being able to see, you know, the interpersonal system would be really valuable, too.
Wow, that's interesting. I haven't heard that before on the couples doing it together. But yes, so one thing I've always tried to do is combine mental health and physical health. So to like overlay, a timeline of mental health symptoms, how they ebb and flow versus physical health symptoms, and just have all those diagnoses together so that it's one view and not like your mental health is somewhere else with some therapist who's doesn't even use a medical record. So that's always been like a principle of this. And then, so on the second point, you're thinking.
Well, I just can imagine, because like oftentimes one thing causes another thing, then causes another thing with the other person, and sort of seeing that interpersonal, like how are they affecting each other?
Interesting.
You know, you mentioned like parenthood, like how does that then look in both of their, you know, experiences, and then how can you sort of pick up on like, oh, you're doing this, which is then causing that in the other person, and vice versa.
Yeah, fascinating. And to be able to visualize that, I think, is what you're saying.
And ultimately, you'd like to be able to do that for a whole family or even a whole community, right? There is an incredible study that was done. It was in Somerville, Massachusetts. It was called Project Somerville or something. It was to look at childhood obesity in the context of the entire community, and who were the agents of change. And, you know, there was the teachers and the community workers and the nutritionists and the patient and people and their families and the kids, and beautiful mapping of all of that at a systems level, but also really considering each individual person. It reminded me a little bit because they had also a beautiful pictorial representation of that.
Mm-hmm. We can learn. I think we can learn a lot from making information visual. I think.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes.
Jamie, did you have a question?
So I have a lot of friends in their 20s and 30s who usually go to their OBGYN with symptoms that aren't niche but are prescribed birth control instead of testing because it isn't recommended for women under certain ages. So to me that seems like a real roadblock, and I'm just wondering how would you recommend 20 women in their 20s, 30s, and honestly early 40s to navigate that landscape?
I don't know how to answer that.
I think that in this day and age, because healthcare is so rushed, I think most doctors and healthcare practitioners have the best of intentions, and they will frequently default to what seems like the first line solution. So I think that if you're uncomfortable with a solution offered by a doctor or other healthcare practitioner, you just have to assert yourself and tell them that you'd like some tests, okay, or some x-rays or whatever needs to be done to actually figure out what the problem is and not just blame it all on hormones. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, that's a very good answer. And it goes back to that fundamental discomfort that I was describing, why got me into this area of research is the frustration of having to resort to prescribing as almost a knee-jerk reaction that is very much kind of built into the way that medicine is practiced, and we need to move away from that. Mm-hmm.
So I am just going to ask one last question for you all, and we should have maybe a few minutes if you have any questions to come up and ask these women. But to close this conversation, what is one, doesn't have to be a piece of advice, but just one closing thought on, with your industry, women's health? How would you encourage the room right now?
I think that the power of routine can be transforming. If you're one who's had trouble with sticking to an exercise program, sticking to a healthy diet, a sleep schedule, it can be very daunting just to establish an entire routine, from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. And try to follow every step. I would recommend just picking one area that's really important to you, whether that's sleep or healthy eating or working out every day, and just start with the working out piece. Start with a 10-minute workout, whatever that is. Stretching, walking, doing just a quick weight workout. Try and schedule it into, look at your schedule at the beginning of the week and see where you can fit it in. And if you get through a week of it, magic things will start to happen. And pretty soon, you're going to feel better, you're going to sleep better, you're going to desire healthy food that helps support your weightlifting, and because you're going to feel so good, you'll start increasing the length of the workout. So never discount the power of routine in self-care.
That's great.
I really like that. I agree. No, I agree. That's exactly, and I think that the way, you talk about vicious circles, but there's also positive, just like and one good thing can lead to another good thing. So it's important to not try to do everything all at once because that's overwhelming. So start by something that you're drawn to, and it'll help the whole system. Yeah. Exactly. So I think that's very true.
I don't have any encouragement. I mean,
yes, you do.
I mean, nothing specific. I think one thing that I was going to mention is there are, like with the menopause question, there are these specialty clinics popping up a little bit in Vermont. I have a friend who's a nurse practitioner, and she focuses only on menopause. So I think there's also some like more national, like big growing startups that are like women's menopause virtual clinics. So I think there's some interesting stuff happening just in the landscape of digital health and women's health right now to keep an eye on.
Love
it's
it.
exciting. Yeah.
It is. I mean, and Pictal is exciting too, so everyone should check it out.
Yeah. Sure.
So if you haven't already, there are programs around the room that just have a big QR code on them, and there's more information about each of our panelists, and also if you want to check out, Pictal or Points North, or just the incredible resume that Helen has, would love for you guys to check that out and use them as resources. So once again, we have a few minutes left, so you're welcome to come up and chat. But thank you all so much for coming, and we'll see you March 23rd. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.